and gentlemen, welcome to the Source Material Comics Podcast. Listen, we are doing a crossover with Chris Armstrong Show, Small Screeners. And Chris Armstrong's right over there. Chris Armstrong, buddy, number one, welcome back to the podcast. And number two, this is all one of those Chris Armstrong ideas. So I'm not going to try and explain it. I want you to kind of give the listeners an idea as to what went through your brain and what our plan was here.
Sure, yeah. So, I do the Small Screeners podcast where me and my friend AJ do episodes based on made-for-TV and direct-to-video movies, talk about those. And last year we did a DC animated movie, Batman Under the Red Hood, and I wanted to do another one this year. And my second favorite of those DC animated movies is probably Justice League: The New Frontier, which is an adaptation of DC: The New Frontier that Darwyn Cooke did. I had never had a chance to talk about the comic, which is one of my favorites, or the animated movie. So I thought, hey, maybe Jesse would want to do the comic on his podcast, and then we could do the movie on my podcast. So I love this material, basically, is what I'm saying. And so I want to have a chance to talk about it, and you were receptive. So that's kind of
absolutely. So I knew Darwyn Cooke's name. I knew of the New Frontier series. I had never sat down and read it until I had the opportunity here to do it for this show. So you said were you reading this like as it was coming out, or just you had a chance to get it shortly after it came out, or what led you to pick this book up, I guess, first, and then when did you read it?
I remember vaguely when it came out. I did not read it when it was originally published as like a limited series. One of my friends had the Absolute edition, like the big hardcover slipcase of The New Frontier. He had read it and really liked it, and he let me borrow it. He thought I would like it. I really did. So that was probably about 5 years after it came out, maybe a little less, probably 2008, around there. I think it came out at least started in 2004. Years later, I got my own copy of it, and I've only read it a couple of times. I think reading it for this, I think was only the third time I had read it, and that's mostly just because of how long it is. It's a pretty quick read. The way Darwyn Cooke does, it's mostly 3-panel pages and then some splash pages. And so it reads pretty quick, but it is 400 pages. So it's not one to just sit down for a leisurely, read.
Kind of give you an idea of the background for Darwyn Cooke. I mean, I don't know. Was this the first time you'd heard of this guy when you started reading this? Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Born in 1962, Darwyn Cooke started his career in animation at one point, working on the Batman the Animated Series and Superman the Animated Series. That obviously translates to the page here, for sure. Definitely gained recognition with the comic book industry when they illustrated Batman Ego.
Yeah, I've never read that one. I think that was his first published comic book work.
Right. One-shot graphic novel written by Darwin Baker in 2000. His breakout project was DC: The New Frontier, which we are getting ready to talk about, a 6-issue limited series published in 2004. Other works that he has done, continued to work on various DC Comics projects, including The Spirit, a revival of the classic character created by Will Eisner. I mean, actually, they did a movie.
Yes, a very, very bad movie that Frank Miller directed. And it looks like, have you ever seen the Sin City movies?
Yeah.
It's very much like the same kind of filmmaking style as those
just not as
Sin
good,
City movies, but not nearly as good. I like the Sin City flicks, but not The Spirit so much.
Gotcha. He wrote and illustrated Before Watchmen Minutemen, prequel to Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' iconic Watchmen series. Cooke also worked on Catwoman and Richard Stark's Parker graphic novel adaptations. As far as awards go, throughout his career, Darwyn Cooke received numerous awards and nominations for his work, including Eisner Awards and Harvey Awards. His contributions to the comic book industry were widely celebrated, and he became known for his unique blend of classic and modern storytelling. Art style is definitely retro.
Very influenced by animation.
But yeah, Darwyn Cooke unfortunately passed away in May of 2016. Had a battle with cancer and unfortunately lost that battle. But absolutely remembered as one of the prominent creators and visually just stunning, some of the stuff that he had done as well.
Especially of this century. He kind of got started in the early 2000s in comics and very much a lauded career. Those Parker books are, I've read some of the Catwoman work he did with, I think Ed Brubaker was the writer as well, or co-writer on some of those. And I think I read the Batman the Spirit book that he did. And other than that, I think the only thing I've done that I've read of his is the Richard Stark's Parker novels, where not sure how familiar you are with those, but the Parker character is like a crime noir character from crime fiction from, I think, the 60s, going back to the 60s. A lot of his stories have been adapted to movies. The most famous one is probably Payback with Mel Gibson.
Yeah.
He plays Porter, which is a big thing with that character. Strangely, was they wouldn't let anybody use the name Parker for a long time. They always had to change his name in the movies that they adapted. But yeah, Darwyn Cooke adapted several of those novels into graphic novels, and they're in like a kind of a digest format almost. They're the size of like a hardcover novel rather than the size of a comic book. They're kind of in black and white with some shades of color. They're really, really good. I've only read one of the Parker novels, but I've read all of the adaptations that Cooke did, and they were excellent.
Yeah. I think our first story, if I remember correctly, we have the loser story, right? That's kind of where we open things at, is where the losers are sent to, I think they're sent to rescue an Axis scientist, I believe. And was it with Richard Flagg at that point?
Yeah, I can't remember, but they are rescuing a Nazi scientist, try and bring back to America as part of, their rocket program whenever they crash on this mysterious island.
Yeah. They essentially, this mysterious island ends up being inhabited by some dinosaurs. So they are, number one, they're trying to find the scientist and get him off the island. However, their team unfortunately runs into these dinosaurs and most of them get killed, but they are able to do, at least one of them lives, and that is Cloud, right? I think it's Cloud that lives. He lives at least enough to get Flagg off of the island to a boat, I think, but he sticks around because
they kind of run into a T-Rex and a pterodactyl.
Right.
Are the main ones that kind of kill off the characters. And it's really like, despite the fantastic nature of them fighting dinosaurs and stuff, it's really like that classic, World War II soldier thing where these guys are all, they're a band of brothers.
Right.
And Cloud, he can't just let these beasts get away with killing his friends. He's going to take them out before, if he has a chance to,
Right. There is a great scene at the very end of this where Cloud is, him and the dog, because the dog, I think, was helping him, but he ends up he ends up getting injured severely while this T-Rex is he's on the side of a mountain, essentially, and this T-Rex is about eye level with him. He knows he's going to die, so he just staggers to his feet after accidentally tripping a booby trap, which, what a way to go. But he accidentally trips this. He gets to his feet, he grabs 2 grenades, and falls into the dinosaur's mouth. And that is a great way of ending that story. What this is setting up is this whole 1950s era that we're going to get into here with this whole story. The main antagonist here is a entity called the Center. You have no idea what it is until we essentially hit the final act. But there's cults running around that are preparing for the return of the Center. And it's almost like the idea I got was this huge Lovecraft monster that's coming. And I'm not too far off there towards the end, but it seems like that's kind of what we get. It's like this massive world-ending beast is going to show up. And what's the world going to do in order to try to stave this off or at least beat it? The other thing we kind of set up here is, we're ending. I think we start out. Is it Korea? Is it the Korean War that's happening? I know that's what's happening in the film, but I think that's happening.
Yeah, that's where Hal is. Hal Jordan, when we first see him. It's right as the ceasefire is declared. So right at the end of the Korean War. Superman
and Wonder Woman are out doing the United States government's work, trying to help end the war and also rescue those who are less fortunate. But it's definitely a situation where Superman is at the whim of the government. Not much Batman.
The Dark Knight Returns.
Dark Knight Returns. Thank you.
Yeah, not to that level of like cronyism.
Exactly. Truth, justice, and the American way, and he's out there helping the troops and trying to help in this war. Wonder Woman, who is definitely by his side, but she is also starting to see the cracks, I guess you would say, in the fallacy of just blindly following what the United States government says is right versus what is wrong, especially when she has that confrontation with Superman, where she rescued a group of ladies who essentially this village was wiped of their the men and the children there. But anyway, she shows up and liberates them, and they take their revenge, and she's like, so be it. That's kind of where we see Superman and Wonder Woman at this time. The Flash is just coming into his own. He's a crime fighter, but the state that this world is in, there is a incident that happens where our man dies and a bunch of cops die.
Yeah.
That sets off with Eisenhower, who says, look, vigilantism and very much a Civil War vibe, where they're like, you've got to show us your identity, or vigilantism is definitely outlawed unless you're in the service of the United States. Yeah,
very, Civil War as far as like the Marvel series, or kind of like Watchmen, where like, yeah, the capes are not allowed.
Right. So Barry Allen's running around. He's still trying to help people. And then it turns out the government turns their eye towards him to try and capture him, which he evades capture, and then he quits live on TV. That's kind of like where the Flash is at. We kind of see him in his early days. He's being a crime fighter, and then he's like, okay, I'm done. Now, all the while this is going on, remember, we still have the threat of the center that's still out there. I would say most of this book, a good portion of this book is spent with Hal Jordan, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah. It seems like Hal and John Jones, Martian Manhunter, are probably the two characters that get the most page time anyway.
Right. Hal Jordan, we see him actually from a very, very young Hal Jordan, who is that's one of the pieces of the kind of the backstory that you don't get in the film, but where you get to see him kind of go and find his childhood hero, Chuck Yeager, and then you see him grow up and he becomes a pilot, hotshot pilot that he is, and then you also see the trauma that he endures as he's going through air battles. And there, you specifically watch him get shot down. He lands on a Korean soldier. And this is something I didn't pick up in the book. And granted, I might take all this out here, but just letting you know, I didn't realize that he didn't fire on any of the ships.
Right. Yeah. He's like a pacifist.
Very much a pacifist. He lands, when he gets shot down, he ejects, and then he lands right into a trench right on top of a Korean soldier who tries to kill him. At this point, the war is supposedly over, but obviously the Korean soldier doesn't realize this, tries to kill Hal Jordan. Hal Jordan reluctantly, fighting for his life, has to pull a pistol and shoot this guy in the face, which traumatizes him. Again, throughout the book, you kind of follow him as he becomes a pilot for Ferris Air or whatever it was called. I can never remember what it's called. He begins working for Carol Ferris and continues his piloting job all the while. Then the government Carol shows him like, hey, we're doing some secret work for the government. Come on down to the underground facility here. And she begins to show him that they're planning on going to Mars. So he starts to train as that. So I'll kind of leave him there for that. Let's talk about Martian Manhunter.
Yeah, because that kind of ties into why they're trying to go to Mars.
Exactly. There was a scientist who sent a signal but accidentally transported Martian Manhunter to Earth. The sight of Martian Manhunter gave the poor man a heart attack, the poor scientist a heart attack. Or that's where we're introduced. You see Martian Manhunter just kind of standing over this scientist who is on the verge of death, but obviously you learn that he's not tried to kill him or something like that. Mm-hmm. Anybody who looking in on that probably could have thought that. But anyway.
The Martian version of Martian Manhunter, very tall, gangly, elongated skull, red glowing eyes, kind of terrifying. If you don't know, his intentions are sinister.
Exactly. He realizes now he's on Earth and he has to try and blend in. So he's got the shape-shifting abilities. I do want to say that one of my favorite sequence of panels is him watching is Martian Manhunter watching TV and shape shifting each time he sees something on TV. He's Bugs Bunny at one point. He's the Indian at the Please Stand By screen as it comes on. I think that was great. But anyway,
something that would be totally lost on anybody under 30.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, he starts to try to learn how to blend in, and finally he lands on the John Jones persona as a detective, becomes a detective, and in point in fact, he ends up like a few years later running into Batman, who is investigating these cult appearances. These cults, and this cult has a kid in the church, and then Batman and Martian Manhunter end up saving the kid. Obviously, we clearly see that Martian Manhunter is scared of fire in that scene. But the main thing that we learn here is that now Martian Manhunter and Batman have met, and they are dealing with the cultists are talking about the center. So what is the center? Everybody's trying to figure out what is the center, what is happening. I'm trying to think if I forgot anybody. Those are all the big names, folks. If you look at this book and you read it and you finish it, and hopefully you've got the copy that gives the footnotes of all of the characters that show up in this story, because there are a ton. And I mean, those are the big names. There are definitely, like we talked about, the losers, the challengers of the unknown are in this book, and it's not like they're just, hey, here we are, guys. No, they play an important part.
Yeah. The Blackhawks.
Blackhawks, exactly. The Blackhawks.
Slam Bradley is one of John Jones's buddies, as he's pretending to be a cop in Gotham.
Right.
Which I don't know if you're familiar with Slam Bradley, but I mostly am, because I'm reading a book, that Gotham Year One comic that just wrapped up. I've been reading that, and it's the main character of that is Slam Bradley, and he's like a PI in the 1920s Gotham.
Okay.
And, I believe the reason he is a DC character is because he predates Batman. Like, Detective Comics 27 was the first appearance of Batman, but they were doing Detective Comics, for several years before Batman showed up. And I believe Slam Bradley was one of the detectives that were in those comics before Batman showed up. So he still pops up from time to time, even in current DC continuity.
Okay.
So it was cool to see him. And I think even Darwyn Cooke even says maybe in the annotations that Slam Bradley is his favorite DC character.
Oh, that's awesome. So there's our main players. Essentially, what we've got to do now is we've got to talk about what the center is. Like I said, it's a massive monster, and it first shows up. I think our first inkling of it showing up in regards to, like, okay, it's come to end the world on Paradise Island. So it shows up and it wreaks havoc on Paradise Island. So now we've got a problem. Luckily, Wonder Woman's able to escape in her invisible jet. Nice. By the way, the blood in the invisible jet, what a touch. It ends up heading towards the United States, and Wonder Woman tries to get word to us that we need some help. Now, in the meantime, building up to this, the Flash, who is retired, is still kind of retired when he starts to hear the commotion that's going on, and decides, okay, well, hey, I need to step up. I need to help out, try and keep these people safe.
Sorry, Lois Lane is on, is there reporting on everything, and like it's just kind of getting the word out that the center is become this huge threat that's on the coast of Florida, basically. And
then Abensur shows up at some point, giving Hal the Green Lantern ring. And so we now have the stage set where Hal Jordan has the ring. Superman obviously is aware of the center after Wonder Woman shows up. Oh yeah, that's right. Adam Strange is involved in this. They think he's crazy. He's like at an asylum. That's great. And then he's like, nope, I'm leaving now, and I'm going to go join everybody. Green Arrow's involved here. One thing I wanted to point out about Martian Manhunter, and I know I'm jumping around here, but he ends up getting captured by the government. Yeah,
he tries to hitch a ride on that rocket, and King Faraday, a guy we haven't really mentioned yet, is kind of like the main government spook that's trying to find out what the Martians are wanting. And he's kind of leading the program to get that rocket up to Mars. And he sees he's the only one who spots Martian Manhunter trying to jump on that rocket and hitch a ride back to Mars because he wants to get back home. They have a confrontation, and the Martian Manhunter saves him. He had a chance to get away, but if he does, Faraday will be burned up in the rocket fire. So he saves Faraday, but that results in him getting captured as well.
Ends up earning his trust. When the center starts making its way, King's like, okay, you're with us here. I trust you. They obviously come to terms, and they trust each other. And Martian Manhunter joins the fight. Martian Manhunter is a great, him and Hal are really good characters to use in a story like this, because Martian Manhunter is taking place in the 50s. He's kind of paranoid because he thinks everybody on Earth is probably going to be afraid of him if he reveals himself to be a Martian. So there's that aspect. And like Hal is a test pilot who wants to go to space. So that's when all those programs were going on, is in the 50s, late 50s. So a couple of really good main characters to kind of focus on from DC's catalog. I kind of want to point out here, too, that, Darwyn Cooke is writing this story, taking these characters that we all know and love in 2004? Mm-hmm. And this story is being told but it feels so much like a Silver Age story. But not only that, it's a great kind of like updated version of, like, it's got Silver Age feel, but modern sensibility is probably the best way I could put it.
Yeah, and I've always thought it was like an interesting angle. Like, oh, he's doing all these different DC characters, all this lore from DC, but he's putting it in a different era, this late 50s, early 60s era. But that was actually when all of these characters were showing up in real time. And I noticed in his annotations, he's got Darwyn Cooke put together these kind of rules. He calls it, there's a little box here. It says the laws of time, space, continuity, and the new frontier. To put together a story this large with a cast this impressive, one must set some rules to stay on track. And one is the timeline is real and covers 1945 to 1960. Silver Age characters appear at the time DC started publishing them, i.e. Barry is hit by lightning in 1956.
Wow.
2, retcons haven't happened yet. 3, no new frontier retcons could contradict original continuity. They had to complement existing continuity or show a fresh point of view. 4, when the story ended, everything had to be as it was when the JLA debuted in Brave and the Bold number 28. So he was kind of setting all this in Silver Age DC continuity, which is kind of interesting.
I love those rules too, because any other storyteller would have been like, I want to play fast and loose. This can be a Black Label, or this can be an Elseworlds. And that was not the case. That's awesome. All right. So off the coast of Cape Canaveral, here comes the center. We have our convergence of everybody where Green Lantern finally shows up. He's got the ring. He's going to join. Ray Palmer shows up, which they're going to use technology that he has invented to try and defeat the center. We have Superman. We have Martian Manhunter there. We have the Flash ends up showing up. There's a great point where everybody kind of has to get on the same page because, again, it's set in an era where the government distrusts these superheroes. So there's a lot of soldiers who are very upset about the fact that they have to, team up with these vigilantes. They actually start to fight. Yeah. And the person that shows up and finally brings everything to a understanding is Superman. Superman does this loud thunder clap, and I mean a legit clap. And he goes, see, I have your attention. Good. This is going to stop here and now. And I mean, he means business. When you look at that panel, his eyes are red. My best friend is lying upstairs right now. She would have given her last breath for this country, and she may yet. And I could hardly look her in the eye because he's kind of like ashamed that we can't come together to try and defeat this one large threat that we're busy squabbling amongst ourselves while this certain death is coming this way. So it's a great speech. Superman's able to bring everybody together, and then they enact the plan. Just do your best real quick to kind of describe to the listeners what the center is.
It's sort of, it's basically an island. I think they describe it as over 25 miles wide. And I believe it is the same island that the soldiers are on at the beginning of the story.
That's what I was wondering. I wondered if that was the case.
But it's sentient. We see at one point in the story where like a children's author, which is clearly supposed to be Dr. Seuss, because he's got like stuffed animals of his characters sitting around his office or whatever. He's sort of a proxy for the center, kind of writes out the history of this creature that, is primordial basically. And it's been growing in power for, millions of years, whether it's the island itself or something on the island that is kind of taking control of it. That's what they're fighting at the end is this gigantic island with all these creatures on it that are dinosaurs and other like you said earlier, Lovecraftian type creatures that are we've never seen before.
Yeah, and it can apparently shoot out this large destructive engine underneath it because its plan is to kill us all.
It is seeing humanity grow and evolve, and now that it has atomic power, which this is shortly after World War II, it sees humanity as too dangerous. It's too big of a threat to the Earth, and it wants to kind of wipe humanity out. It also is planning to leave Earth, but it wants humanity gone when it gets back, essentially. Well, yeah, that's kind of its plan, and that's the big giant threat that all these characters are kind of having to rally together to fight.
Superman finally gets everybody on the same page, and he's like, all right, I'm checking it out. I'm going to go take a look at it first to see what's going on, what this thing looks like and what I'm facing, but ends up getting shot as he's out there. And when I mean, it is a massive blast that hits Superman and sends him careening on fire right into the ocean. And that, to the horror of everybody watching, is where humanity is like, oh no, we've got a problem, because the one person that we thought could definitely take us through this just got obliterated.
Not as comedic, but very similar to the Deep Blue Sea moment with Sam Jackson.
Yeah.
Where he's kind of taking control. He's kind of going to lead the charge. And then, I guess he's dead.
He is dead.
Now what?
He's dead. After that, they are obviously reeling, but they have to make a decision. Okay, how are we going to do this? They still have a plan. Superman wasn't like, hey, I want to go out here and beat it. They still had to go, still plan on using Ray Palmer's technology. They're also going to invade it with some planes, a la Hal Jordan. They do it. They're able to muster an offensive, go out there. Flash straps that thing to his back, and he was unsure that he was going to be able to do it, but he was able to get out there and run across this massive island, and they're able to finally defeat the center. It looks like it's about to explode or crash into Cape Canaveral, and that's where Green Lantern gets his chance to shine, where he fully dons the costume. And granted, he had to go through some stuff, trust me. I'm leaving out the whole part where he and was it Ace fly into the center. Yeah, and there might have even been some other planes that went with him, but anyway, he ends up going into the center, and all sorts of crazy stuff happens to where it looks like he's about to die, until finally takes control with his willpower, and he's able to escape. He also is able to grab this near destructed entity, take it into space out of Earth's orbit, so it's no longer danger. And our heroes have won. And then at the end, lo and behold, the King of Atlantis brings Superman to shore. The heroes reunite, and everybody's so happy. Then we kind of realize that we are closing out the 1950s and heading into the 60s. They do a great way of ending this book. I think it's a speech by John F. Kennedy, which they also did in the movie.
I don't know if it's called the New Frontier speech, but he says that in the speech. And I've definitely heard excerpts from it before, but yeah, he uses it here to kind of close out the epilogue.
The last page of the book is the cover to first public appearance of the Justice League,
where they fight Starro.
That is how we end things. So yeah, things are about to change.
Again, I really love that first chapter, which is all about the losers on the dinosaur island, basically. And the first action we really get is this T-Rex attacking, and we see Gunner, one of the loser characters, doing like a rolling dive for a bazooka, and he kind of swings back with it over his shoulder and blasts away at the T-Rex. It's just a really awesome example of Cooke's artistic ability, that rolling motion that he's got in those three panels, and comes up with a bazooka. I just really like that moment. Yeah. And then again, despite the cartoony kind of art style and the crazy circumstances, Cooke really delivers like a dramatic tale with these World War II era soldiers in this crazy situation that they're in. That panel of Cloud leaping into the T-Rex's mouth is just like an all-timer. And they managed to get that in the movie, even in a different way, because like we said, none of this is in the movie with these characters, but that's a really cool visual.
There's a quick shot of what was written on the wall, that Cloud wrote on the wall, I think, in the movie. They had King Faraday jumping into the dinosaur's mouth in the movie.
The sequence with Hal in the trench with the Korean soldier, that's always been a sequence that stood out, like the desperation and everything, with him slowly turning the gun up and like begging the guy to stop and trying to explain, like, the war's over, we shouldn't be fighting. But he even says later in the book, like, he was a pacifist, he wasn't firing at other planes. He was only in the Air Force because he wanted to eventually go to space. Yeah. But then the Korean War broke out. He had to go fight there.
It's a hell of a touch there. He can't think of the words in the moment in Korean. I think he's trying to say in Korean, the war's over. He can't do it. He ends up killing them, and they get him onto the copter, and he's actually speaking Korean, and he finally remembered the copter. And I was like, oh man, that's a good touch right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And later he talks about, and I think it's towards the end when he's talking to Ferris before he decides to go fight the Center with everybody else. He discovered, he wasn't willing to kill, but he discovered, in that moment, like, what would push him to that point is he would kill to survive. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the position he was in towards the end as well. But yeah, my favorite panel or favorite image maybe in the whole series might be that image of John Jones standing over the scientist with his gangly limbs and the shadows. It's just kind of haunting and terrifying.
Yeah. I think this is mentioned, but it's evocative of what they were trying to do in this book was give you the sensibility and fears that they had back in the 50s going into the 60s. UFOs were definitely one of them. Martians were definitely one of them. That was a fear that a lot of people had. We're like 5 years outside of Roswell happening at that point. And, it was clearly taking center stage in pop culture when it comes to UFOs and aliens. So
yeah, and I love later John is like laughing at he goes to see a movie as in his human disguise or whatever, and it's like a Martian invasion movie, like a cheesy sci-fi movie from the 50s, and he's laughing at like how bad it is, and everybody in the crowd is kind of annoyed by him because he thinks it must be a comedy, but everybody else thinks it's taking it seriously. Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit about this Indochina thing with Wonder Woman and Superman.
Oh yeah,
and Superman's kind of horrified that Diana would let these women murder their oppressors, and she has no problem with it, to the point where a big thing that stuck out in this book back then, and I think it's a big deal in the movie as well, like Diana kind of towers over Superman. She's like 2 inches taller than he is.
Yeah.
And they make a point to make Wonder Woman big and powerful looking. When they disagree, she kind of shouts back at him and then, tells him there's the door, spaceman, and points him out. I really love that scene. It's good in the animated movie as well, but it works even better, I think, in the comic. I'll throw it back to you because that's probably a good third of the book for my notes. So
right.
You got some stuff.
He has to try and get this story across like it actually is happening in those eras. He does it, I would almost say flawlessly, because you come away with this like, okay, what was on everybody's mind? We already talked about UFOs was on everybody's mind. Nuclear war, that tended to be an issue too. We had a big fear of communists. The Red Scare was going on. I think McCarthy is mentioned a lot in here. And that's another thing you got to get used to with this book. If there were actual superheroes, you can guarantee they're going to be involved with the government somehow. They're either going to be against the government or they're going to be working with the government. There's a lot of politics here, a lot of actual politicians that are referenced. I think McCarthy is referenced in this. There's a couple of newspaper articles that get thrown in here, and it makes you feel like, oh, I'm reading a real old-timey news story. I think that's actually where I remember McCarthy being mentioned. So there are a lot of politics, and this whole Wonder Woman Superman thing that you were talking about that's probably one of the greatest examples in this book of where it shows you that these people are struggling to do what they're being told, even though clearly the sense of justice for both America and Amazons are different.
It really shows the contrast between Wonder Woman and Superman,
Right.
Even though they're both kind of like, the two biggest, like most powerful DC characters that you think of as being like altruistic and everything and noble and everything. They still have some big differences in the way they see the world.
Yeah. There is a lot of great backstory to, especially like Hal Jordan, and Martian Manhunter, and watching them kind of deal with the situations that they're in. So, I mean, kudos to him handling that well. And again, it's a modern storytelling sensibility, I think, that he did with those characters that really shines, and he does well while keeping it believable and not straying so far off the path that we were already used to. Batman, early in the book, looking like the Batman from the 30s, with the, yeah. And then later on, as things progress, he's got a sidekick and he definitely looks different. His mask isn't as scary.
Sorry, Anne gave him a reason for that, because the first time we see Batman, he's fighting all these cult members, and Martian Manhunter, John Jones, stumbles upon this thing, and they're going to sacrifice this little boy. And when they rescue him and Batman ungags him or whatever, the kid is terrified of Batman.
Right.
And he kind of explains later, when he has kind of an updated look, a less sinister look, that, he wants to scare criminals, not little children. Gives him like a reason for why he kind of lightened up as the Silver Age was taken off.
Are we talking Steel here with John Henry Irons, or are we talking?
Yeah, that's interesting. I was curious if that was when he shows up. I was like, is that a classic DC character, and maybe that's where the idea for Steel came from or something? But no, that apparently he wanted to comment on the civil rights movement, because that's this era. DC was super white, so there wasn't, really any black characters to really talk about from this era. So he kind of used Steel as his inspiration to create this John Henry character that fights the KKK in Tennessee and in this era.
Yeah, and ends up dying, which was unexpected to me. I didn't expect him to die. He ends up in a horrible, horrible way, too. When he falls through the gate and the girl, he's hoping that little girl will not say anything, and she starts yelling. He wasn't pulling punches here either, because he uses the N-word.
For this style of artwork, especially, even with some of the violence, there's a lot of goddams and he uses the term putt knocker at one point, maybe more than once. And racial slurs, I think maybe only that once, but it's got a lot of harsh stuff that I think is trying to be evocative of the time period it place in.
I was just sitting here. I'm like, when is Hal Jordan going to turn into the Green Lantern? Yeah. It's got to happen soon, right?
Yeah, I remember when I this movie, when it came out on DVD, I picked it up, and me and a buddy watched it. He had never read the comic, but he watched the movie with me. In the movie, it seemed like even longer. Because he uses the ring a little bit, but he doesn't really become the Green Lantern until the very end of the book. And then in the movie, when he finally uses it toward almost at the very end of the movie, my friend was like, "Finally!"
Yeah, dude.
He's been waiting this whole time for Green Lantern to show up. But yeah,
the fight against the Center is pretty crazy and wacky. I mean, it definitely gets out of sight when Hal Jordan and Ace get into the middle of the Center, and all of a sudden it becomes this, the symbiote takes over. I have no idea what's happening in there. They have to try and keep their grasp on reality because of how crazy. Again, another thing that feels Lovecraftian to me. That's
a cool thing about the Center is it's psychic abilities, it's influencing people that are going crazy all throughout the book. But when they go to attack it, its defenses are really up. Once it knows what Hal, and I think it's Nathaniel Adam, who I'm assuming is Captain Adam.
Okay.
And one of the challengers, I forget which one it is. They're in there with their bombs. That's when it's really going in overdrive, getting into their heads, making them see things. And that's another reason why it's kind of a genius to use Martian Manhunter in this book, because he is so affected by the psychic attacks of this creature because of his telepathy and stuff. Again,
I want to reiterate that we talked about the main players here, but Darwyn Cooke does just a phenomenal job of getting everybody in here. There's a large fight sequence boxing match between who is it again? Cat.
Ted Grant. That I was going to bring up that scene as well, because there's an aging Ted Grant, defending his belt against the young Cassius Clay, and he gets knocked down at one point. He's clearly out, and is saved by the bell. But there's a little dream sequence while he's unconscious. They're waiting to get back up, where he sees himself in a pool surrounded by lovely ladies. And then give him the smelling salts, and there's a great image of him kind of being snapped back to reality, and then he goes back out for the next round. But yeah, it's several 5 or 6 maybe longer pages of that, and it plays into a bigger sequence in Las Vegas where Bruce Wayne and Selena Kyle and Lois Lane, a bunch of characters are kind of meeting up there in a big sequence, and then Captain Cold shows up for a cool little action sequence.
All right, I'm stepping back. You can finish your notes out.
The other things I really had, there was the Martian Manhunter there's the scene where Batman shows up in his apartment one night when he gets home, and kind of tells him basically, I know that you're not a human, and there's something weird about you. He doesn't really know exactly what he is or whatever, but he knows he's got good intentions, so he's trying to get his help figuring out what's going on with all the cults and everything. Basically tells him hey, all I need to take you down is a 10-cent book of matches. I know.
He knew how to take out Superman. He mentions that, doesn't he? He says, I had to pay $60,000 for a space rock to take out this guy, and all I need against you is a penny book of matches. And you're just like, oh wow, right then.
Right. Yeah, and he brings Jones some evidence that he's collected in his investigations, and Jones is trying to kind of figure out what's going on with the center with all these all this mass hysteria that's kind of going on. That's like part of the psychic attacks that the center's putting forward and stuff. Let me see what the Dr. Seuss thing I talked about earlier with the children's author who ends up writing the story about kind of the history of the center and kills himself. I thought that was kind of genius. There's also Jones is looking through this book that he's found in his investigation, and there's like a 2-page sequence of this Viking warrior who ends up on the dinosaur island and stuff. And it looks like Cooke's trying to approximate Joe Kubert in this sequence. And then I saw in the annotations that was what he was doing. He was because there was a specific Joe Kubert. I forget who the writer was, but Kubert was the artist on a specific like Viking book that he was trying to kind of emulate his style with that sequence, which was kind of cool.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. I'm
really glad that Cooke got a chance to draw Superman fighting a giant robot.
Yes, does happen.
That was a cool sequence. The rocket rescue sequence that you kind of talked about earlier, really intense. A lot of stuff going on. Superman can't quite save everybody, but that's one of the better sequences in the book, I think. And it has this 2 pages of Rocky, who is from the Challengers, but a very cool. And actually, I think it might be Rick Flag. It might be the one who dies in this sequence. I think the Challengers are the ones that Superman manages to save. And
okay,
it's Rick Flag and his female companion that go up in the explosion, which is different. It plays out quite a bit differently in the movie as they had to condense a lot of stuff. Again, like I said, it's a lot of it is about the more of the civilian, or not civilian, but like the normal human characters. But as the threat gets bigger and we get closer and closer to the end, more of the superheroes and those characters start to come into play. It was cool to see Adam Strange, like you mentioned earlier. That's a character I really kind of like. I think he looks cool. He's got a jetpack, which is cool, and a ray gun.
Yeah.
But I've never really read a lot of stuff with Adam Strange, but I was happy to see him show up in this. And he really plays a big role because he's the one who knows about Ray Palmer's technology. And recruits him. And that's kind of the key. Like without that, they probably would not have defeated the bad guy at the end, you know. It was really cool to see the cosmic characters. They show up kind of on the moon and decide not to interfere, which was kind of strange, but it was cool to see Dr. Fate and the Spectre show up. I was a little disappointed that Darwyn Cooke didn't get a chance to throw Shazam in there anywhere, or Captain Marvel. I think he's up there as Billy Batson.
Okay.
With all the other.
Oh, he's sitting around the table eating. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But we don't see him as Captain Marvel. And I would love to see a rendition of him from Darwyn Cooke, but we don't get that. We talked about how Superman, had kind of a rousing speech and then a quick smackdown.
Yeah, he did. Wise off.
Captain Nathaniel Adam. That was the 3 that go into the center. They have this big plan at the end, which is really kind of cool that Darwyn Cooke thought this through. It's like a 3-pronged attack. They have people attacking it from one side, and then they have these 3 jet planes that are supposed to fly through inside the creature to plant bombs. And then the 3rd prong is the Flash using Ray Palmer's shrinking ray to destabilize it and kind of make it explode. And yeah, the 3 that go into the center, one of them is the character who would become Captain Atom. And he dies in an atomic explosion. So I'm assuming that's Darwyn Cooke kind of winking at the reader, saying, like, this is how he becomes Captain Atom.
Okay.
And the other 2 survive. Hal survives, and he saves his buddy, who I think is one of the challengers.
Ace is one of them, I think.
I really like the Right Stuff homage. 2-page spread where they're all walking down the tarmac. Like the characters in the movie that I've never seen, but I've seen.
You've seen that still, yeah. You've seen that slow-mo walking.
But yeah, that's pretty much all I got. I really love this story. I think that Cooke did a great job with it, and I've still got to track down that special that came out, and to coincide with the movie's release. I don't know if it is just a reprint or if it's actually an original story, but I guess I'll have to find out.
All right, man. Yeah, dude, we did it. I mean, this was a massive undertaking, 6 issues. But folks, I mean, we were trying to do the math on this because it is legit. I think 400 pages. So it's about 60 to 70 pages per issue, which is what an undertaking. And he did just a phenomenal job.
Final thoughts, just a really comprehensive look at the DC universe of the late 1950s. And he squeezes a lot. Like as much as we've talked about this for over an hour, and we really just hit the broad strokes. There's a lot of great art and a lot of great Easter eggs in the different sequences that you can pick out. A lot of cool extra material from that standpoint, and I just really like that he gave the lesser known characters, like the smaller guns, more of a spotlight. Such a huge epic type conflict. He also managed to get the big guns in there for some cool stuff as well. But yeah.
This has been the Source Material Comics coverage of DC, The New Frontier. Chris Armstrong mentioned we have another podcast that we're going to be doing. Keep an eye out for it. Small Screeners. What are we doing over there again?
We're going to be looking at the animated adaptation of this comic called Justice League, The New Frontier. Came out about 4 or 5 years later. After this, which we didn't mention, this is almost 20 years old. Next year will be the 20th anniversary of this story, which is surprising to me, but I didn't read it when it came out either. I read it, maybe 4 or 5 years after it was released. But yeah, we're going to be looking at the animated adaptation on Small Screeners, where with my buddy AJ is going to join us for that, the normal co-host for that episode or for that podcast. So looking forward to it.
All right, good deal. All right, folks, I'm not going to bore you with plugs. I'll just let you know, keep an eye out on this here feed. We have all sorts of other shows. Unspoken Issues shows up on here. And AI Writes, you may get a new show that. I've got 2 episodes of that out there. So with that being said, that's Chris Armstrong over there. I'm Jesse Starcher. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us. All of this would not be possible without W2Mnet.com, so make sure to seek them out for more podcasts. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please feel free to share, and we look forward to entertaining you again soon.